The thunder cracked so violently it shook the windows of the Carlisle mansion. But the real shock came from the tiny sound that slipped from Leo's lips, an involuntary gasp, barely a whisper, but unmistakably a reaction. Mara froze mid-movement, the cracked tuning fork trembling between her fingers. Leo's eyes widened, his small chest rising sharply as if some impossible sensation had struck him from the inside. He had heard something. Just for a split second. Just enough to change everything. Just enough to terrify Mara. Because she knew this moment was coming, but not this soon. Before she could decide what to do next, footsteps thundered down the hallway, cutting through the storm's roar. Someone was coming. The moment shattered like glass. Hours earlier, the mansion had been calm, at least on the surface. But beneath the polished marble floors and expensive silence was a tension so thick the staff had grown accustomed to moving like ghosts. Andrew Carlisle, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the state, walked through life with an expression carved from stone. People rarely saw him smile. Those who did suspected it was an accident. His power sat on his shoulders like a shadow. His mansion, massive and immaculate, was a symbol of everything he'd built and everything he'd lost. His son Leo had been born deaf. Doctors gave him explanations, but no solutions. They called it inherited auditory dysfunction, but Andrew called it something else. A curse, a punishment. A repeating tragedy that haunted his family for generations. Leo himself was a gentle child, barely 3 years old, with bright eyes that seemed to understand far more than he ever expressed. He communicated in gestures, touches, the scrunch of his nose, the widening of his eyes. Andrew loved him fiercely, but the guilt of failing him, failing to fix him, was eroding him silently. The mansion staff whispered behind closed doors, wondering why such a powerful man seemed so powerless around his son. And then the maid arrived. Mara had stepped through the mansion's doors with nothing more than a worn-out coat, a simple bag, and eyes that seemed to notice everything. She came from a small mountain village few had heard of, and she carried herself with quiet confidence, like someone used to being underestimated. Andrew hired her on the spot. None of the staff understood why. Some said he felt sorry for her, others said he saw something familiar in her. A few whispered that she had some strange influence over him. But the truth was much simpler. Leo had smiled at her. The boy who rarely reacted to strangers had looked at Mara with curiosity, as if recognizing something in her he couldn't name. From that moment, Mara became part of the house. Her presence was delicate, but impossible to ignore. She moved silently, worked diligently, and treated Leo with a tenderness that surprised even the most hardened staff members. But then, the strange things started happening. Small at first, barely noticeable. Leo would tap his fingers on the table, fascinated by the vibrations. Mara would tap back, perfectly matching his rhythm, watching him with eyes full of calculation and something softer. When she cleaned his room, she hummed, not loudly, but low enough that vibrations traveled through the floorboards. Leo always turned his head as if sensing it. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Doyle, hated it. "Mara, stop that nonsense. The boy can't hear you." "Sound isn't only heard with the ears," she said gently. "He feels more than people think." Mrs. Doyle scoffed loudly. "Don't bring your village superstitions into this home." But Mara only smiled faintly and continued her humming. Soon after, Andrew began noticing things too. He'd walk into a room and see Leo's hand resting on the wooden window frame, Mara tapping the glass lightly, sending vibrations through the surface. The boy would mimic the beat with a grin, his entire body responding as though the rhythm was speaking directly to him. Andrew watched this once from the doorway, confused and unsettled. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked her. Mara turned slowly. "Helping him interpret the world," she replied. "His world is not silent, Mr. Carlisle, just different." Andrew's jaw tightened. Doctors have spent years on this. If there was hope, they would have found it. Mara didn't look away. Sometimes we overlook what's right in front of us. Her confidence irritated him. She didn't talk like a maid. She talked like someone who knew something he didn't. That night, Andrew reviewed the documents, medical reports, specialist notes, genetic analyses predicting deafness in every firstborn male in the Carlisle line. He stared at the words "inherited condition," but all he could feel was the voice of his grandmother whispering old stories about a family sin. He slammed the file shut and poured a drink. Downstairs, Mara tucked Leo into bed, her fingers brushing the pendant around her neck, a small metal piece engraved with symbols almost identical to the ones in Andrew's grandmother's old journals. The same symbols he never told anyone he had seen. The same symbols Leo seemed drawn to. As the sun set, that evening the sky blackened almost instantly. A storm rolled in, violent, consuming. Lightning split the sky open, and rain hammered the roof so loudly it drowned the household in a relentless roar. The power flickered. Leo flinched. Mara's eyes snapped toward the hallway instinctively. Something was calling her, something she had been waiting for. The lights went out. A gasp from the staff echoed in the darkness, followed by frantic movement. But Mara didn't panic. She moved calmly, almost deliberately, toward the staff quarters. There, hidden inside a loose floorboard beneath her bed, was a small wooden box wrapped in ancient cloth. She held it with both hands, her expression shifting, calm, then heavy with emotion, then resolute. Upstairs, Leo began to cry, not loudly but in frightened little breaths, feeling the vibration of thunder but not understanding it. Mara reached his room, the box held tightly against her chest. She closed the door behind her. Slowly, she unwrapped the cloth, revealing a cracked tuning fork, a faded photograph of a woman with eyes like hers, a metallic pendant with worn-out symbols. She inhaled deeply. Then she struck the tuning fork gently against the wooden bed frame. Leo froze. His eyes widened. Something rippled through him, through the floor, through the air. He reacted. Something awakened. And then, footsteps. Fast. Angry. Getting closer. Mara's heart slammed against her chest. The impossible had just begun, and the mansion was seconds from erupting. The footsteps stormed closer, heavy, uneven, fueled by panic rather than anger. Mara's pulse drummed in her ears as she stood protectively before Leo, the tuning fork still quivering in her hand. His tiny fingers clutched the blanket, his eyes darting between the door and Mara with an expression she had never seen on him before. Fear, confusion, and something else, something new, fragile, impossible. He had heard something. The doorknob twisted sharply. Mara didn't move. The storm boomed again, lightning flashing against the curtains, casting monstrous shadows across the walls. The door burst open. Andrew Carlisle stood there, soaking from the rain, his chest rising and falling with frantic breaths, his normally perfect composure shattered. His eyes locked onto the scene, the dim room, the small wooden box on the floor, the strange metal pendant glinting under the weak emergency lights. Mara stood over her son. "What are you doing?" he demanded, voice low, trembling. But it wasn't anger. It was fear. A father's fear. Mara swallowed hard. She didn't answer. Andrew's gaze dropped and froze. Leo was staring directly at him, not aimlessly, not with vague curiosity, but with recognition. Andrew took a step forward. "Leo?" The boy's eyes flickered, and the tiniest sound escaped him. Half breath, half startled exhale. Andrew's heart nearly stopped. "Mara, what did you do?" She lowered the tuning fork, but she didn't put it away. "What needed to be done?" she whispered. From the hallway, Mrs. Doyle appeared, holding a flashlight, her eyes widening as she realized what was happening. "Mr. Carlisle, sir? Should I call security?" "No," Andrew snapped instinctively, then quieter. "No. Stay where you are." He stepped fully into the room. Rainwater dripped onto the carpet from his sleeves, but he didn't notice. All his attention was on Leo, who was still staring at him, still reacting to something the boy had never reacted to before. "Mara," he repeated. "Explain, now." Her expression softened. "Leo heard the tuning fork," she said. Mrs. Doyle scoffed loudly. "Impossible! Completely be quiet," Andrew said, without looking at her. Leo blinked, startled by the sharpness in his father's tone, and Mara's breath caught. The boy reacted again. His shoulders jumped, his fingers curled, his wide eyes locked on to Andrew like the sound had hooked into him. Andrew saw it too. "Do that again," he whispered. "What?" Mrs. Doyle said. "Say something," he hissed. Mrs. Doyle cleared her throat awkwardly. "Sir, I don't—" "Say something," Andrew barked. Leo flinched. All three adults froze. There was no denying it now. No misinterpretation. No hopeful imagination. Leo heard something. Not clearly, not fully, but he reacted like a child hearing a sudden noise for the first time. Andrew's eyes brimmed with something none of the staff had ever seen on his face. Tears. He knelt beside the bed, reaching for Leo's cheek with trembling fingers. "My son, Leo, you can—" His voice cracked and broke apart like fragile glass. Mara quietly stepped back, giving them space. But Andrew wasn't done with her. He turned sharply, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "You tell me the truth, everything." Before she could speak, another roar of thunder rattled the window. Leo whimpered, clapping his hands over his ears, not because he heard the sound directly, but because he felt the vibration so intensely it startled him. Mara lowered his hands gently. "It's all right, little one," she murmured, voice steady. "It's just the sky speaking loudly." Leo leaned into her touch like he trusted her more than the walls around him. Andrew noticed. He didn't like it. He hated it. "Did you know?" he asked her slowly. "Did you know he could hear something?" "Not exactly," she said honestly. "But I knew he wasn't as deaf as you believed." Mrs. Doyle exploded with outrage. "You're telling lies. This woman has been doing strange things since the day she arrived. Tapping on walls, humming at furniture. She's been frightening the poor child with her—" "She's the only person he responds to," Andrew snarled. Mrs. Doyle's mouth snapped shut. The storm outside intensified, but inside, the room went eerily still. Andrew closed the door himself, shutting out the chaos of the staff, the shouting, the confusion. He said again, "Talk." Mara placed the tuning fork on the bed carefully. "Leo's hearing isn't lost, it's hidden." "What does that even mean?" "His condition isn't the same as your father's or your grandfather's," she said firmly. "The doctors assumed it was genetic because your family history suggested it. But inherited deafness doesn't behave like this. The tuning fork vibrations reached his cochlea. They resonated. His auditory pathways responded." Andrew stared at her like she was speaking another language. Mrs. Doyle muttered, "So now you're a doctor?" "No," Mara said simply. "I'm just someone who knows the truth." Andrew's eyes narrowed. "Truth about what?" Mara handed her hand over the wooden box. "About your family." A cold chill crawled up Andrew's spine. He recognized the pendant lying inside, not the object itself, but the symbol etched on its surface. He had seen that symbol only once, in his grandmother's journal. Old, yellowed pages, filled with cryptic notes about vibrations, resonance, and a technique she claimed helped her child feel the world even in silence. Andrew had dismissed it as ramblings. He'd locked the journal away, buried it. And now here it was again, staring him in the face, revived in the form of a maid who seemed too calm, too certain, too familiar with things she shouldn't know. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. Mara looked at him steadily. "From the same woman who gave it to your grandmother." Andrew's blood ran cold. "That's not possible." "It is." Mrs. Doyle gasped. Andrew stepped closer, heart hammering. "Who are you?" Thunder boomed once more, so loud that the walls trembled. Leo whimpered again, clutching Mara's sleeve. Not because he heard the sound directly, but because he felt the vibration so intensely it startled him. Mara lowered his hands gently. "My name is Mara," she said softly. "But you already know that." Andrew shook his head, voice trembling. "No, I mean, who are you really?" Mara inhaled, steadying herself. "I'm the granddaughter of the woman your family abandoned." The room froze. Andrew's breath caught. Mrs. Doyle stared at Mara like she'd committed murder. And Leo, he simply clung to her, sensing her heartbeat, trusting her like she was the only solid thing in a storm-ridden world. Andrew staggered back, gripping the foot of the bed. "My grandmother didn't... She wouldn't..." "She did," Mara said quietly. "Your family buried the truth, and because of that lie, your son has suffered." Andrew's face drained of all color. "What truth?" Mara touched the pendant gently. "Everything." The storm roared again, louder, angrier, almost as if the heavens themselves were demanding the truth at last. And Mara, the girl from the forgotten village, knew it was finally time to reveal the secret she had carried her entire life. Andrew looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, white-knuckled, breath shaking, unable to decide whether to step forward or collapse backward. The storm outside hurled sheets of rain against the mansion, each strike echoing the chaos tightening inside his chest. Mara knelt beside the wooden box on the floor, her fingers brushing the pendant as if touching a memory. "Your grandmother wasn't just some eccentric woman with strange beliefs," she said softly. "She was taught by someone from my village, someone with knowledge your family rejected." Andrew shook his head slowly, like he could push her words out of his mind. "My grandmother she was troubled. She believed things that weren't real." "She believed things your father refused to understand," Mara corrected. "She believed that sound isn't only heard with ears, it's felt, interpreted, echoed through bone and vibration. And she believed that the firstborn sons of this family weren't cursed. They were simply different." Her eyes shifted to Leo. The little boy was resting against her, breathing shallowly, watching his father with curiosity and fright tangled together. "My grandmother," Andrew whispered, "tried her entire life to prove my father wasn't broken. He hated her for it. He fought her. He said she was losing her mind. He said she was putting hope where there was none." "She wasn't," Mara said. "Your father silenced her because he feared the truth." "And what truth is that?" Andrew snapped. Mara lifted the tuning fork again.
that this family wasn't cursed with deafness, but gifted with an alternative sense of sound. Mrs. Doyle scoffed, but Andrew didn't. He stared, conflicted, hungry for answers he didn't want to hear. Mara struck the tuning fork against the wooden bed frame again, gentle, controlled, precise. Leo froze. His small hand lifted. His fingers trembled in the air. Then he reached toward the fork, toward the vibration itself, as if he could see it. Andrew's breath caught in his throat. "This is how your grandmother taught my grandmother," Mara said. "This is how she helped her son feel sound, and how she helped him begin to hear." Andrew swallowed hard. "But my father didn't—" "He refused her," Mara said. "He refused to let her continue any of the techniques. He called her methods witchcraft. He locked away everything she wrote, and when she tried to continue in secret, he cut her out of the family." Andrew clenched his fists. "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to know." Mara's voice softened. "Your father feared anything he couldn't control." The room was silent except for the storm. Then Andrew whispered, "Why are you here?" Mara hesitated, something fragile flickering across her face. "Because the woman your family abandoned was my grandmother, and she died believing she failed your family."
She died believing she wasn't enough to convince you all that her methods worked. She closed the tuning fork inside her hand. "I came here to finish what she started." Andrew's jaw tightened. "So you came for revenge?" "No," Mara said immediately, shaking her head. "Not revenge. Closure. Healing. To prove she wasn't wrong." She touched Leo's cheek gently, and the boy leaned into her hand without hesitation. Andrew's voice cracked. "Why didn't you tell me from the start?" "Because you wouldn't have believed me," Mara said, "and because I didn't want to be thrown out before I could help him." Silence closed in, a heavy, aching silence that wrapped itself around the room. Andrew finally sank into the chair beside the bed, burying his face in his hands. His shoulders trembled, not from anger, but from a lifetime of confusion, guilt, and emotional wounds that never healed. When he lifted his head again, his voice was barely audible. Can he truly hear? Not fully, but he can. And with time, with the right methods. Leo suddenly crawled toward his father, placing a tiny hand on Andrew's knee. Andrew froze. Leo looked up, eyes wide, curious, searching. He opened his mouth and let out a small, hesitant sound. It was soft, unsure, but deliberate. Andrew's breath stopped. He repeated it, a tiny imitation of a sound he felt earlier, a sound he remembered. Andrew's face crumpled. Tears spilled down his cheeks. He grabbed his son, pulling him into a desperate embrace. "My boy, my beautiful boy, you heard me." Leo pressed his ear against his father's chest, not to hear the words, but to feel the vibrations. He smiled, a real smile. Andrew nearly collapsed from the force of emotion. Mara turned away, silent, letting father and son have their moment. Even Mrs. Doyle pressed her hand to her mouth, tears slipping out despite her earlier hostility. But the moment couldn't last. A new tension crept into the room, cold and subtle. Because now that the truth had surfaced, consequences would follow. Andrew wiped his face and looked at Mara with a mixture of gratitude, fear, and suspicion. "Why didn't your grandmother come back? Why didn't she fight harder?" "She did." Mara lowered her gaze.
She begged your father to listen, begged him to try the techniques on you, but he refused. He threatened to have her removed by force. She left because staying would have made things worse. And you sent you here? No, she never asked me to do anything. Mara's voice trembled for the first time. She died when I was 9, but she told me stories. She told me about the boy she helped, about the family who threw her away, about the pendant she swore would one day return to its rightful place. She looked at the metal pendant in the box. I came because I believed her story mattered, because I believed Leo deserved answers no one else would give him. Andrew stared at her for a long, tense moment. Finally, he whispered, "Help me." Mara looked up sharply. "What?" "Help me teach him. Help me undo what my father did. Help me give Leo the life he deserves." Her eyes softened. "If you allow it, yes." A sudden crack of thunder shook the house again, but this time Leo didn't startle as much. His hand rested on his father's chest, absorbed in the steady thump of a heartbeat stronger than any storm. For the first time in years, the Carlisle mansion didn't feel cursed. It felt alive. Hours later, after the storm died and the staff finally slept, Mara stepped outside onto the balcony, overlooking the dark, dripping gardens. She held the pendant in her hand, the cold metal warming slowly against her skin. Andrew approached quietly. "Are you not planning to leave, are you?" She gave a faint smile. "Not yet." He nodded, relieved. "If there's anything you need, anything, tell me." "There is one thing," she said softly. "Let the truth be known. Don't hide what your grandmother discovered. Don't bury the past again." He inhaled deeply. "I won't." Mara nodded, satisfied. Because somewhere in the quiet distance, she knew another family, another child would someday need her. Leo's laughter drifted through the window then, soft and delicate, carried not by sound, but by vibration, by warmth, by connection. It was enough to make Andrew close his eyes and exhale in gratitude. And as Mara walked back inside, she whispered to the boy in her arms, "Your world will never be silent again." The pendant glimmered faintly, like a promise finally fulfilled. The impossible had happened, and it was only the beginning.